Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube. And Sam, we are officially in the offseason now. It's the offseason. It's May. How you doing?
Offseason season.
Yeah, like we said it when the season ended, but that was like the intense offseason, the fun offseason, team building offseason. Now it's the, okay, let's take a breather. Let's relax offseason. It's a little different.
Yeah, well, we said there would be, there is no NFL offseason really, right? And people think it's when the game's finished. The game, honestly, it gets more busy from that point on because you're straight into draft prep, you're into free agency, all that stuff. And then it's all draft all the time, right up to the draft. If there is such a thing as an NFL offseason, it begins now for a little bit, and then we're back to rookie mini camps, training camp, and then it all spools up again.
Was it next week? I'm probably going to throw this idea your way. I can't wait to see your face when I ask about the schedule release, instant reaction.
Yeah,
we got to do the. That's
our last holdout of not kowtowing to like the NFL, the desire and the insistence the NFL has to make an event out of like everything. We've been, well, okay, we can do, obviously the free agency, the draft, blah, blah. The one thing we haven't done is like, look, I refuse to care about the schedule until the games actually start playing. But as the years go by, it becomes more and more clear that we are in a minority on that. And we may have to just accept that other people care, even if we don't.
We have to get out there and say, what are your top 10 favorite games of the year? Even though we already know what the games are, we have to say, well, now we know it's week 9 at 4:25.
But the interesting one that you pointed out is we're still don't have full declaration. It's still not official what that Ireland game is going to be. I need to get back onto the guy and try and swing something for that as well. But we need to figure out what that game is going to be.
We do need to figure that out. So so here's the deal. We'll do our mug check at the end of the show. Again, we need to just tell everybody, hey, email check the mic at the33rdteam.com for offseason ideas. Always having fun when it comes to ideas. And we're not going to the 100 humans versus one gorilla thing.
We're late on that.
Overblown. We're late. It's been done. People have done it. We're not gonna top it. Right? You got Channing Crowder out there saying, "I already fought alligators. I'll be first man in on the gorilla." Like we've already got solutions for that. But those are the types of things that we could tackle here in the offseason.
That needed to be if that had hit, like if that had gone nuts, 2 weeks later, we'd have been front and center on that. That would have been a Monday show. It would have been a whole strategy. We would have had the team picked to take down the gorilla, but we're too late. It came at the wrong time, and it's gone.
Can't do that during draft season. You can't have that type of analysis in the middle of draft season. But by the way, just thanks to everybody during draft season. Couple things. Everybody that watched all of our videos, new subscribers, appreciate everybody for joining there. Also appreciate everybody that donated to Doug. We were raising money for leukemia and in honor of Doug's daughter who passed away at 2 years old. We did that just for a few shows last week. And over $1,100 raised just from Check the Mic viewers and listeners. We said that we would match that. So appreciate everybody for donating and being a part of that. And it wasn't like a long campaign, but couldn't believe the quick turnaround from everybody. So much appreciated.
Yeah, Doug was very pleased and surprised. So good work to everybody. Thank you very much for that.
The last thing, housekeeping note, we're going to be here live Monday and Thursday. So there's not really an off season for us. It's more like, hey, we're going to keep doing shows. We'll do 2 a week. We'll crank it back up to 3 a week. We'll always go live if something big happens. If there is a big trade, if there is news, if Aaron Rodgers finally decides he's going to play football, maybe a schedule release, instant reaction. Who knows? Maybe a watch along. You never know. Emergency pods are still, available.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else at the top here?
Last 2 things. Number 1, please hit that subscribe button. We've had a ton of people jump on over the draft period. And we were up to past 44,000. You told me we're chasing 45,000. We're just chasing bigger and bigger numbers. So hit the subscribe button for us. And then the last thing for today, this is an unusual one. Our producer, Will, is sick, having caught whatever his kid had in terms of a vomiting virus and may or may not be at the controls. So if he isn't, it means we are at the controls flying solo with the graphics. I can't imagine we would screw that up in any way, shape, or form. But if you are watching and you see a graphic that bears no resemblance to the show, or, the entire graphic package or whatever drops off the screen, it was probably me mashing the wrong button.
So can we dismiss Will? Will, you're dismissed. If you need to go, you go. Rest, hydrate, do what you got to do. Let Sam take over. We got this thing. We got
I've got the week.
All right, so we wanted to talk about the top 10 off seasons, right? We've been through free agency. We've been through any sort of big trades, most likely. Look at this. You did it. You pressed that button. Proud of you.
Yeah. It's all me.
And now we've been through the draft. And like we've said, because it's our own show, we don't need to put this in linear fashion. We don't have to say offseason number 1 and 2 and 3. We don't have to order them, but we can just list 10 teams. So I let you list the 10 teams, and I'll kind of react to it, and we'll see if you missed any. But top 10 off seasons. Let's start with the Chicago Bears. What were your thoughts on the Bears? And first off, like how did we come up with what's a good off season for you here, Sam?
Well, I think it's the totality of everything, right? Like it's what did they do? I think for some teams, the offseason begins with like there's a coaching vacancy, right? And that is true for the Chicago Bears. So number one, what did you do in terms of hiring your new head coach, new GM for some teams? Like, did you get the right hires at the right time? Did you get player or people in the building that we think from the outside should make a massive material difference and move this thing in the right direction? And then what did you do in free agency? And I think that can be bringing in new players, but we've also said, at free agency, it starts with re-signing your own guys, right? There are a couple of teams out there who had a ton of people scheduled to hit free agency, and the big part of their offseason at the start was like bringing them all back, right? Keeping them in the building. So what did you do in free agency? Retaining your players, bringing in new players, and then obviously the draft that we just had. Did you have a good draft? Did you bring in a haul? Did you have one of those top graded drafts that we've been talking about for the last week or so? So all that together, I think, constitutes an off season. And I think, good ones can be, I think if you're on this list, you had a good, probably all three of those bits and pieces, or at least most of them. I think you struggle to get on this list if there's at least one of those where you're like, yeah, that didn't look great, right? If you were on the bottom end of like draft grades or free agency grades, even if you did good things the rest of the offseason, I think it's tricky to get onto this list.
The other thing is we're skewing positive in our old age here, of course, and we come out of the draft talking about how, hey, most teams drafted pretty well, or at least not crazy. It feels like most off seasons, 30 teams, you can at least make a case that 30 teams not necessarily got better, but feel good about where they are. And there's always like one or two teams. It's like they lost a lot of good players and they didn't replace them. That was the Cowboys a couple of years ago. Yeah. The Cowboys have been on the good end of that and the bad end of that. They're one of the first teams that comes to mind where there's a couple off seasons where it feels like they just didn't do enough, or they got worse than the previous year. They might be in that list again this year.
It's kind of like,
but most teams feel positive at this point, right?
But that's why I think you have to factor in, like retaining players and stuff as well. Because if you're the Patriots or the Titans, you're one of the worst teams in the NFL. It's pretty easy to improve, right? You just bring in anyone that wasn't on the team last year. They're probably better than the guys they're replacing. Ergo, you got better. Whereas if you're, one of the top 5 teams in the NFL, you were already pretty good. Hence your position at the sharp end of the playoffs. It's hard to get better from that point. So a big part of that offseason might simply be retaining people that were scheduled to hit free agency or whatever, and like keeping the core in the building. But yeah, it's a little bit like sort of soccer, the transfer market every year, where it sort of feels like if you're not actively getting better by bringing in improved players every year, you're getting worse by active staying still. Like Liverpool last season basically didn't sign anybody. Federico Chiesa for like pennies on the dollar at the end of the thing. And it was like, what a disastrous transfer season they had. They didn't bring anybody in and they end up winning the league. But that was the narrative, right? Is they didn't sign people, therefore they didn't get improved. They didn't get any better.
So let's start with the Chicago Bears, the first team that we mentioned. And I can already hear the people. I already hear the haters. Hey, you said this last year. You said this last year. You said, generally, people said that Caleb Williams, as of all the rookie quarterbacks, 6 drafted in the first round. Did we say maybe that he was stepping into the best situation? It may have been said, may have even been said on this show that was the case, that it felt like, hey, maybe the offensive line isn't as bad as it looked with Justin Fields. Maybe the fact that they just drafted Rome Odunze to go with DJ Moore and brought in Keenan Allen for a mid-round pick. Yeah, that's not a bad situation for Caleb Williams to step into. Turns out, fired the offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, halfway through the season. He wasn't I don't think he was doing a great job there. Keenan Allen's getting a little bit older. Offensive line wasn't as good as we thought. Is it true this year, though? Are the moves that the Bears made this year, is this what is going to get them back on track? Ben Johnson, all the other offensive line moves, and some nice defensive line moves as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're predicting the future, right? So we're never going to be batting 1,000 on any of this, but it looks like the moves have been good. I mean, let's start with the Ben Johnson thing. We don't know if Ben Johnson is going to be a good head coach or not, right? Nobody ever knows before you start that process, or before you see the results, whether it's going to work. But it's fair to say that Ben Johnson has basically been the prize for a new head coach for like the last several cycles, right? 2 or 3, he's been the coach that everybody's been kind of targeting and trying to get in the building. And for multiple years now, he said, no, I'm going to stay with Detroit. We've got unfinished business. I love things here. I'm staying with the Lions. And he's pulled himself back from head coaching searches. The Bears were able to get it over the line. Like, the Bears were able to get the prize of the head coaching carousel for the last few off seasons. They were able to convince him to come into this building and be the head coach of the Chicago Bears. So that's a coup, if nothing else. They've gotten the guy who theoretically on paper is the number one option for most teams, even if it doesn't end up working out that way, long term. Again, process wise, it's the right thing. It is a good move, whether or not it ends up paying off for them. Then you're like, well, what has Ben Johnson now got to work with? Well, then they completely said a bit about rebuilding this entire offensive line. You can see, some of the offseason additions that they've made, like in particular, trading for Joe Thuney. I understand why Kansas City was willing to let him go, age, contract, money they already have invested in that offensive line, but he's arguably the best pass blocking guard in the NFL still at this point. It's a huge upgrade over a questionable offensive line last season. They bring in Jonah Jackson as well in the trade. That's, slightly lower down in terms of impact, but could still theoretically upgrade that offensive line. Like, they did serious work. Drew Dahlman at center, major work overhauling an offensive line, because Ben Johnson understands the power of an offensive line. Again, from the last few years in Detroit, where they've had a top 2 offensive line kind of over the time he's been there. So immediately you've got huge upgrade at coaching, theoretically, huge upgrade on the offensive line, again, theoretically, while we see how that pans out, each of which support Caleb Williams, the previous investment that it's not exactly like it's failed yet, but hasn't necessarily, like, Caleb Williams didn't hit the ground running the way Jaden Daniels did. But we still think that he has, elite high-end NFL potential. In order to realize that, these are things that need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, a lot of it looks good. I mean, when you talk about the offensive line, having that trio on the interior, including Thuney. I mean, Thuney's still as good as it gets as far as guards go in the NFL. Even though there was some hope that last year's offensive line would be better, I don't think they were great. They're very inconsistent, especially in pass protection. Obviously, to me, the biggest story for the Bears is the relationship between Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson. When we described Caleb Williams' play last year, inconsistent from week to week, it felt to me like they were telling him, don't make mistakes. He had that interception run, and it kind of coincided with higher sack totals, and it felt like he wasn't playing free and easy. And if Ben Johnson can get that out of him, that would be great. And when I look at teams, I always look at, obviously, the offensive line as a unit. All right, they did a lot there. I look at the receivers. I want to see at least a trio of pass catchers that are difficult for the defense to defend. And I think the Bears, having DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, adding Luther Burden, adding Colston Loveland to go with Cole Kmet as well. Now they've got some flexibility. You've got some personnel flexibility on that offense. One of the questions would be the running back position. Everybody assumed that they were going to attack. They didn't attack it until round 7 with Kyle Monangai from Rutgers. Walt doesn't make a lot of good points in this in the chat here, but he makes one that I actually like. We have to call out the good ones when Walt makes a good suggestion, right? And that they might be in the Nick Chubb market, right? Nick Chubb is out there and working out and probably squatting 1,200 pounds and doing all the stuff. I mean, for a team that was talked about going second round running back here, if you could drop Nick Chubb into this offense with Ben Johnson, that could be pretty nice there.
Did you see his workout video with the hurdles?
Yeah.
I mean, look, so it's worth saying Nick Chubb did not look like Nick Chubb when he came back last year, right? I mean, I agree. I think Nick Chubb is a potentially very interesting signing for a team this offseason because before that injury, he was up there with Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley as like best running backs in the NFL. In fact, he would have appeared ahead of Saquon Barkley on most of those lists at that time, such as the way these things work, right? He then gets hurt. Saquon Barkley goes to the Eagles, and suddenly Saquon's the best running back in the NFL. Nick Chubb's just this dude who broke his knee one time. Now, when he came back last year, he just didn't look like the same guy. He didn't have the same level of explosiveness, etc. And maybe that will never come back, right? That happens to NFL running backs. He's at that kind of age anyway, where it would start to become an issue. And that was a devastating knee injury. I mean, that was the kind of injury, like Marcus Lattimore back in the day, where it's like that guy's just never going to be the same after that. So he may never get back to anything like where he was. And I don't know what the relationship is between like on-field explosion and dynamism and workout videos where you're jumping and hitting the ceiling. But he was posting these workout videos as he does, and he's doing these hurdle drills, the last of which he jumps over a hurdle and his head touches the ceiling panel, like caves in the lowered ceiling panel as he leaps clear over this hurdle. I mean, that's explosiveness I don't have. Let's just put it that way. I don't know if that's going to have a one-to-one relationship with breaking NFL tackles, but it was impressive.
And as I've said before, I'm guilty of maybe underrating the impact that the injury has on a player coming back and maybe only looking at the name. But as of now, if he's healthy and has that explosiveness, that could be a nice fit, to drop him into this offense.
If I had a backfield right now that I didn't love in the NFL, I would 100% be kicking the tires on Nick Chubb throughout training camp and preseason and trying to get a read on, does he have the ability to get back to where he was? Because if he does, that's one of the best running backs in the NFL still that you might be able to get for a relatively low fee because of that injury and because of what he was when he came back. If it's not, if he's never going to be that guy again, you can move on and it's, no harm, no foul, but 100% the upside is there for that to be a huge payout.
The other part of this offseason that feels good, I think, for the Bears is most of their back seven pretty much returning and locked in, and they re-signed Kyler Gordon as their slot corner, but then it's the additions on the defensive line. So the fact that they didn't have to do a whole lot on the back in the back seven, bringing in Dayo Odeyingbo, bringing in Grady Jarrett after he got released by the Falcons. So adding some depth on the defensive line. The defensive line has taken a few years, I think, to get back on track. Probably the best one they've had under Ryan Poles at this point. So I think that's, when you add all that up, the investment in the offensive and defensive line, a couple nice playmakers at the top of the draft, the whole Ben Johnson edition. That's why the Bears are on this list.
Yeah. And then we get to their draft, which was one of the ones that we love the most, right? Colson Loveland, Luther Burden, Ozzie Trapil, the offensive lineman in the second round, Shamar Turner. Yeah, then day three was when it started to go off the rails a little bit, where they seem to have a type on the defensive line, these kind of underachieving athletes. So we didn't love that one necessarily. But the first couple of days in particular, when they added potential impact playmakers to this offense, again, supporting Caleb Williams, which is fundamentally the most important thing this team can do, is make sure that the guy you pick number one overall, who has the ability to be one of those, top 8 quarterbacks that everybody's searching for, make sure he realizes that potential. Otherwise, as an institution, you have failed.
All right, man. Other teams on the list here. New England Patriots. Already saw the chat talking about the Patriots. And look, let's be serious here. Of the teams that we've listed here, half of them have rookie contract quarterbacks. I mean, I think that is a factor, right? You can throw 15 million here, 12 million there. Like, you can make those types of moves when you have Drake May, when you have Caleb Williams, when you have Jaden Daniels, when you have CJ Stroud. Like, those teams might end up on the list here. Maybe not the Texans. We'll see what happens. But the Patriots had money to spend, and they had draft capital, right? So it's almost like if they didn't show up on this list, they were doing something wrong. But they did because they made a lot of additions on both sides of the ball.
And as we said at the start, like, they were awful last year. I mean, the Patriots were probably the worst team in the NFL last year, somehow conspired not to end up with the number one overall pick, but they were terrible. Like, this was the worst team in the NFL. Of course they were going to get better in an offseason. Like, changing anything would have made it better with the exception of quarterback. So, like, volume of moves was going to make this team better. But, let's give them credit for some of the moves that they did make, because I think they've done a pretty good job. I mean, they went into it with that incredible war chest of spending room and money to throw at this, right? So they were definitely well positioned to be able to get a lot better. But I think generally they did spend the money on good players or in good places. So number one, you've got the coaching thing, right? They decided to move on from Gerard Mayo immediately. Interesting decision, given how weird that process was to begin with Gerard Mayo kind of anointing him as the successor to Bill Belichick contractually, like way back when, writing it into contracts and stuff. And then immediately, basically within the space of a year, being like, not the guy. And then gravitating back towards Mike Vrabel, right? A guy who apparently technically is not in the Bill Belichick coaching tree, but nonetheless is a sort of old school institutional knowledge type of guy, right? Let's bring in Mike Vrabel from back in the Patriots heyday, because he knows the Patriots way, and he knows how it's supposed to look. So that's the first order of business. I have no problem with either parts of that, really. I think Mayo did enough things that would make you question whether he was going to be the guy going forward, or said enough things that at least made you feel worried about it from the outside. And Vrabel, I think, was unfortunate to be let go from Tennessee. I think he'd done a pretty good job as a head coach. There were, a lot of kind of talk about how well does he work with others, right? Does Mike Vrabel play nice with other parts of the organization? And that's going to be a thing we're not going to know until like watching this unfold over the next couple of years. But fundamentally, I think Mike Vrabel is a good head coach.
Yeah, just on the Vrabel thing, repeating what I said 4 or 5 years ago, it was like, hey, this feels like the next Mike Tomlin. He feels like the guy that is going to be so consistent no matter what he has. Remember when the Titans had the number 1 seed? I think it was the 2021 season. Number 1 seed in the NFL, and you're looking up and down their roster. It's like, yeah, they have Derrick Henry, and they have A.J. Brown. They have Jeffrey Simmons on defense. But their defense in particular was a whole bunch of no-name type of players. Like, hey, we're getting the best out of Danico Autry and other various players around the roster. And it was a new star every week. And it's like, man, this just typifies what Mike Vrabel's teams are going to be, just playing above their skis, right? And 22, it falls apart after they trade A.J. Brown, and that was a big part of it, right? John Robinson getting fired, and Vrabel maybe having more personnel control, and that not going well over the next couple of years. And then the Titans wanted to say, hey, we want to add more, be more analytically sound, have more voices in the room, and it just wasn't a fit. Interesting fit here for New England, but I still think Vrabel can coach. That's the bottom line. I think he can coach, and now certainly has far more talent than Mayo had last year in New England.
I also think, by the way, if you look back at the sort of various points of friction in Tennessee, I think Vrabel was borne out to be correct more often than not when those surface. Now, that's not the whole story. Like, it's not enough to just be right. How you handle it is also a fairly important part of, teamwork, right? Cohabiting with other people. Like, you need to not only be right, but you need to somehow convince everyone else, and actually, like, the process needs to function. It can't just be, I'm right, therefore shut up, right? Like, there's got to be a kind of there's got to be a cohesive team unit working here. So that may be a bigger problem than whether or not Vrabel was right or wrong in each of these individual situations. But I kind of prefer the idea that it looks like he was actually correct when he was trying to make a stand about things. I would prefer that than not only was the guy pissing people off, but he was also dead ass wrong about everything as well. At least he may have been right when he was trying to dig his heels in and trying to make a point. So, let's say I think Vrabel is a good hiring. He's a good coach, and he's been right about quite a lot. And he's stepping into a situation who already has the quarterback, which is a big thing. Now let's see how it works going forward. And then, as we said, look, they had a ton of draft capital and money to spend. Like, they went into this offseason with this insane war chest of spending spree room. They still have like $60 million of cap space, but they brought in some really good players. They won the Milton Williams sweepstakes, which was the big prize, I think, of this free agency, is this kind of young, prime, pass rushing defensive tackle. Carolina wanted him. New England said, not on my watch, and just threw enough money at him that he had to sign with the Patriots.
Yeah, so it was, everybody knew that Drake May needed help this offseason. They spent a lot of their free agent money, just because of the way things fell, spent a lot of that money on the defensive side of the ball, Milton Williams and Carlton Davis. Carlton Davis, I think, can still play. He got hurt at the end of last season. Remember, he was a big part of Detroit's defense and their ability to play man coverage. Him and Christian Gonzalez heading into year 3 as a 1-2 punch at corner. I think that's a big offseason move. The Milton Williams one, as you mentioned, they had very little pass rush. They bring in Harold Landry, who I don't think is a great pass rusher, but at least has that familiarity. Generally dependable, being out there. So they've added some depth on the defensive side of the ball. And I think 2 big-time players in Milton Williams and Carlton Davis. And then they get into the draft. And then Stephon Diggs, right? Then they start to piece the offense together as the offseason progresses. And maybe it was an overpay, in air quotes, for Stephon Diggs. But given the market at that point and the fact that it's a 1-year deal, they needed some kind of playmaker heading into the draft. So they didn't have to draft 4 receivers. So you've got Diggs. You drafted Kyle Williams. We'll see what happens with Williams, but as soon as he can get into the starting lineup, I think the opportunity is there. But Stephon Diggs, Mac Hollins, by the way, who was sneaky good last year for Buffalo, so it's not nearly like last year. It was awful. Last year when you were ranking the Patriots pass catchers and offensive line, it's like offensive line is the worst 1 or 2 offensive lines, pass catchers bottom 3, maybe it might have been the worst of both. Now, look, this year we're not putting them in the top 10. That's not the case. But can they creep back to an average as far as pass catchers go? Can they creep back to an average as far as the offensive line goes? I think that the caution I would bring to the offensive line is we don't know how Will Campbell is going to handle. He's still a rookie left tackle. Jared Wilson could step in as the starting center, but will he be better than like year 6 of Garrett Bradbury? I don't know right away. The O-line might be better 2 years from now than it is right now, but they've at least done the work to lay. My caution for Patriots fans would be it still might be a year away. There still might be a little bit more to do on the O-line, a little bit more to do at receiver, but I think everything's certainly moving in the right direction. Where last year at this time, they had the same issues, and you came into the season being like, I don't think they have answers. At least now there are some answers, both potentially short-term, but certainly long-term for New England moving in the right direction on the offensive side of the ball.
I mean, look, I wouldn't expect either one of those units to be good next year, but the goal is to just not be disastrous, right? Like let's not have it be actively the reason. Like Drake May last season to play as well as he did is genuinely remarkable. Like when he was put into that lineup, certainly I was saying, like, I don't know if they should make this move for the safety of Drake May, like for the benefit of his long-term development. I think it's probably detrimental or harmful for him to play the majority of a season with this supporting cast. Like it has to be damaging in terms of developing bad habits, in terms of, risking him, exposing him to all these hits, et cetera, et cetera. Not only did he not look like he was developing any kind of bad habits, but I mean, he played at a comparable level to some of these other rookies with a dramatically worse supporting cast behind him. It was, I don't think enough is made of how good he looked with what a crappy situation it was around him. So that's remarkable. Like if you can just get those 2 supporting elements, receiving core and offensive line, if you can just get those to passable, like you might have something special in Drake May, given what he was doing last season with what was around him. So yeah, I mean, the talent is not there for that offensive line to be good next year, I don't think, but it could be average, right? Creep back to what average. If it can just not suck, that's really what we're shooting for here. And honestly, the same kind of thing is true with the receiving core. Like Diggs, sure, very, unknown given age and coming off the ACL. I would be excited by what Kyle Williams can be. Like he arguably is the best separator in this entire draft. I think he can be a vertical threat as well. Like he can bring a lot to the table. If he can be something like that, that makes everybody else's job a lot easier, because it's not like some of these other receivers that they have, don't belong on NFL fields. They just don't belong on a receiving core where they have to be as good as anybody else in the unit, right? Like they basically somebody or all of them collectively need to amount to a number 1 receiver. That's not going to happen with this group. But if the best they need to be is a number 2 or a number 3, well, now you've got something you can work with.
All right, man, let's go. No order here. We're just going through teams in the offseason, in good off seasons here. Do you have something else?
No, well, you say they're not in any order, but they are in an order in the graphic. So it would be helpful if we stuck to that order.
Oh, I'm going by the order in the document, which probably matches,
hopefully
right?
is the same, I would assume.
Arizona Cardinals?
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah. I'm going by the list. I'm saying no order for the viewers and listeners,
Correct.
right? We're not
They're
saying,
not ordered.
right.
Yeah. They're not
Here's
ranked,
offseason
but they
number
are
3.
ordered.
Not ranked, but they're ordered. Yeah, perfect. Well done. Arizona Cardinals. And look, we've said this a ton, Sam, but the defensive line, man, I mean, this was like you had a clear need. They attacked it in all facets, and it's going to be much better. And, the biggest thing for Arizona, I thought this offseason was the defense generally, but absolutely up front. And I think they attacked their defensive front with a good mix of veterans and late career veterans like Calais Campbell, who's just returning to Arizona. Guys like Dalvin Tomlinson, but then Walter Nolan, and just having way more depth up front. Jordan Birch, actually using draft picks, bringing in veterans. This defensive front looks way better than it did last year, and I think that's the biggest win this offseason for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is a good way of viewing stuff or not. It may well be a complete mental fallacy, but Trevor thinks this way as well from listening to some of his draft coverage. Like, I like when you can see the pattern, like the thought process, the overall strategy and what a team is doing coherently throughout a draft, like an offseason, whatever it is. I like sort of seeing, well, this is clearly the plan that this team has, and everything's moving in the direction of that specific goal. That makes sense to me. I don't like it as much where it all looks kind of incoherent and scattershot, and each individual move may make sense, but it all sort of feels a bit like random. I don't like that as much, even though I don't know that it makes a difference. It might, like, as long as you're upgrading in each different thing, does it really matter if the pattern
I don't think it matters.
Fits in your head or not? But for the Cardinals, so consequently, the Cardinals are one of my favorite off seasons because it all looks like a plan. It all looks like somebody set out and gone, look, we've got some things to work with on offense, but this defense is a disaster. It looks like, a second string unit in a preseason game. Let's go. We need to upgrade this across the board. And they have. Like, they brought in starters every step of the way. We've got Josh Sweat. We've got Dalvin Tomlinson, Calais Campbell coming in as the seasoned grizzled old veteran, all in free agency. We're keeping a guy like Baron Browning, who we brought in previously, who was dealing with an injury, and maybe he'll be a better player going forward. And then the draft, we're going to keep going. Walter Nolan, like top 10 potential, top 10 talent in this draft in terms of impact defensive lineman. And then throughout the rest of that draft, we're going to keep going with the various other levels of the defense as well. Will Johnson in the secondary, Jordan Birch on the defensive line as well, but Cody Simon at linebacker. Like, I like this offseason because it felt like this defense is so far behind the other side of the ball. Let's deploy everything we have to accelerate that side.
This one reminds me, and the reason why it feels good to you is because of what we said, is how bad the starting point was and that they needed to attack it. This reminds me a little bit of the 2022 to 23 offseason for the Cleveland Browns. Back in 22, Myles Garrett was the only guy that could get pressure for the Browns. He was the only guy, and he's great, but they had some serious issues. And then they brought in Zadarius Smith. They brought in Osa Odighizuwa. They brought in Dalvin Tomlinson, ironically. And the next year had one of the best pass rushes in the NFL. And it's like, all right, they solved this thing, right? And it was a boomer bust type of defense. They gave up some big plays, but I think EPA-wise, they were second or third in the NFL that year before they had their collapse in the playoffs against the Texans. So, yeah, they had busted coverages. They had some bad big plays allowed, but that Browns defensive front in one offseason could all of a sudden, rush the passer with 4 and create havoc, and they did a great job. I'm not going to put Arizona into that same bucket because Garrett is the foundation piece that's obviously missing. But you're talking about a team that really could not rush the passer with 4. When they did start to cause problems, they had some late game success against the 49ers and Brock Purdy when they were still cooking early in the year. It felt like it was schemed up. It felt like they were sending pressures at the right time. It just felt like they were dodging personnel issues on defense all last season. And how many times did we show up on a Monday morning and say, man, the Cardinals played hard. They looked overmatched, but they played hard. I can't wait to see what happens when Jonathan Gannon gets a little bit more talent on the defensive side of the ball. This gives them, when we do our previews in August, in July and August and we start previewing the season, I think we're both going to feel pretty good about the Cardinals going into this year, in part because all of these defensive additions and how hard they played last year with basically, I thought, a second string front seven. It looks much better this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Jonathan Gannon, in fact, I think they've been a very well-coached team on both sides of the ball since Jonathan Gannon arrived as head coach. I think that they were making really impressive things happen schematically, despite the relative lack of talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I think they have significantly upgraded that. Now, maybe we could be a little bit cautious with the praise because, as you said, it's not like they found a Myles Garrett out there, right? Like Josh Sweat is good, not great. Dalvin Tomlinson is limited and sort of old, but at least he belongs starting in an NFL defensive line. Walter Nolan is the big swing because he's the guy that does have legitimate impact, top 10 type of potential, albeit, not quite as consistent or as sort of proven as a guy like Jalen Carter on the field, who he reminds me a little bit of from a couple of years ago. But they brought in upgrades. Now, those upgrades need to actually materialize into something, but at least they've added all these pieces to that defense, and we can really try and see what Jonathan Gannon can do when he has upgraded personnel.
Not a lot of additions on the offensive side of the ball, but they were pretty much locked in there, and I think that's why it feels good to you. It's like, all right, we need secondary help, we need cornerback help, we need defensive line help, and they added potential pieces there. So I thought it was a nice offseason for Arizona, given their needs. Next team you have listed here is the Carolina Panthers. By the way, the Cardinals were the first team that does not have a first contract quarterback that made our list here. The rest of these teams, Bears and Patriots, certainly do, and the Panthers do as well with Bryce Young. So they had money to spend. They had okay draft capital. They were still dealing with the Bryce Young trade, so they were missing a second rounder, but they got one back from the Rams from last year, so it wasn't too bad. But the Panthers, adding a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball, then going with Teterow and McMillan at pick 8. Love the way they worked the draft, getting McMillan, and then the two edge rushers, Princely Umanmielen and Nick Scorton later in the draft. So Panthers appear to be much improved, particularly on that defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, we loved their draft. Their free agency was interesting because they were another team, that came into the offseason with some money to spend, with some clear needs and a desperate need to upgrade, particularly the defense. And they were in on the Milton Williams sweepstakes, et cetera. They thought they had a deal done, and the Patriots came in with basically more money, and Carolina had to pivot, and they had to go in a different direction. And then they started to bring in guys like Tershawn Wharton from Kansas City as a backup plan, Patrick Jones from the Vikings. So they had an interesting offseason because it's not the one I think that they would have wanted to have if they had, optimal, here's your money, here's your free agent targets, who are you bringing in? I mean, clearly they wanted Milton Williams as the big sort of marquee signing and didn't get it done. And I think, look, that's not to say it was a failure. They had a financial line in the sand. This is like part of how you build teams, right? Is you assign a value to each individual player, and once the bidding goes above that value, it's no longer worth bringing that guy in, or at least that's the debate you need to have, right? How much more, like at an auction, how much higher than what you want to pay is still worth it to get the thing you want? Evidently, they decided where that money was going was beyond where they were willing to pay for a guy like Milton Williams. We're going to pivot. We're going to distribute the money to Wharton, to Pat Jones, to other players as well, and hopefully, recreate Milton Williams in the aggregate with the Moneyball meme. So it was an interesting. I think they did upgrade, not in the way they necessarily wanted to do it, but then they then came back in the draft and really hammered that defensive line with their draft picks after the first round pick. But spending on the defensive line in particular in free agency allowed them to use that first round pick on Teterow McMillan instead of needing to bring in a Walter Nolan or a pass rusher with that first top 10 pick. The spending spree that they went on in free agency at least gave them the freedom to say, no, we're going to use the first rounder. We're going to take a wide receiver, and then we can come back in the second and the third round for defensive ends. Yeah.
So to be fair here, I didn't love. Look, I came out of free agency saying Tershawn Wharton's a nice player. Is he worth $15 million? I don't know, 15 per year. Bobby Brown III, Pat Jones, who you mentioned. I mean, I didn't feel great about that coming out. But then when you add the two edge rushers, I might be swayed by like they're throwing bodies at the situation. I might be swayed by the volume attempt here. So 3, I don't want to say big signings in free agency, but as you mentioned, the aggregate of the Milton Williams money. So that's a thought experiment that interested to see how that plays out. Would they rather have one Milton Williams or because it almost adds up. Tershawn Wharton plus Bobby Brown plus Pat Jones almost equals one Milton Williams. Right. So it's 3 bodies versus 1, which when we always talk about trade down in the draft, you get 3 players instead of 1, like it's the free agent equivalent. And then but I love the way they worked the draft to get Prince Umanmielen and Nick Scorton. Now you add them to the mix with Jadeveon Clowney and DJ Wanham. There's at least some potential and some hope there rushing the passer. Don't forget they get Derek Brown back. Missed him. He only played 40-something snaps or whatever it was last year, right? So that's a big thing where this defensive front looks much better in Carolina. And then you add the Tetero and McMillan thing, right? Where we preach take the best player available. We could debate if he's the actual best player, but clearly there was a thought process that we don't have to draft a defensive player despite all these first-round edge rushers on the board. So now you add McMillan, who I think eventually, I think he becomes Bryce Young's top target very soon. Very soon. I mean, maybe it's a year because Adam Thielen's still there and Thielen's talking about being at the end of his career and the dude can still play well enough, out of the slot as a high volume receiver. I think McMillan within a year becomes the top option. We get to see if Lee Gett becomes the deep threat and if they could get something out of Jalen Coker, Jimmy Horn Jr. as that next receiver. So it just sets them up with targets for Bryce Young.
I swear to God, the older we get, the more I lean like dinosaur boomer thought process with team building stuff. Like we've talked about a few different situations, like conservative thought with a small c, right? Like the more usually I would think, I love what the Panthers did. Like once the price tag goes beyond a certain point, and this is true with the Kirk Cousins thing in Minnesota, like you should be assigning, a rough dollar figure to each individual player based off how good he is, what impact he makes, the war or whatever however you want to calculate value. This is what he's bringing to the table in a given season, in a given contract. This is what we think that is worth in terms of dollar amounts. And once the bidding goes above that, or once the contract demands go above that, you're like, we're going to walk away because you're not worth more than that. And that is therefore, even if it's only in the margins, it's harming the team, right? We're now getting not surplus value. We're getting like, what's the opposite of that? Negative value relative to negative surplus value.
Negative surplus. Yeah.
Right. Relative to what you're bringing to the table. So from a process standpoint, I think that's really sound and it's good fundamental thinking. But I do worry that like in a closed market, so that analogy I gave with the bidding thing, the auction, right? You go to an auction, like I really want whatever this is, this car. And I'd like, this is what this car is worth. Once the bidding goes above this, I'm out. I'm walking away from the auction. Somebody else can buy it. You can do that because there's another one coming up next week. And there's another one, it's going to be available down the line. And you can just get the car some other time, right? For the price you want it, because that's what it's worth. You can't necessarily do that in the NFL where there is a closed market and there's only X number of these guys. So if you need a Milton Williams and you happen to need him, this year when he's available and this is the market, once the price tag goes above the price you want to pay for it, your choices become you either overpay for Milton Williams or you don't get the thing that you need in order to, upgrade that part of the defense. And even if you take the money and you throw it at Tershawn Wharton and Pat Jones and blah, 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 there's a fairly healthy chance that even those 3 guys combined do not equal Milton Williams. So that this is what the NFL has always thought, just intuitively, right? Just spend spend what you need to get Albert Haynesworth in the building, right? That's been the thought process for decades. And the kind of new wave of, intellectual, analytical thinking has always been, well, let's push the value thing. But and I was all on board. I was riding that wave along with everybody else, right? But the more I think about it, the more I do think that there's like a rational argument to be like, yeah, but
just
you
pay
need
the
this
money.
guy. You might have to just overpay sometimes.
Well, yeah, because there's limited players available. There's also limited snaps on the defensive line. So if you're saying, well, we're Pat Jones, like last year, Pat Jones rushed the passer 315 times for Minnesota, had a PFF pass rush grade of 50. I mean, like we're saying, like on paper, we're saying, hey, they threw a lot of bodies at this, but there's not like a history of Pat Jones rushing the passer at a high level that he's going to help. but that's why they drafted the 2 players, right? So yeah, it is the other thing I'll add, it's a difficult problem to solve, right? Because it's also, we're talking about this offseason. Obviously, a team like the Panthers or the Patriots, any team is going to be thinking more than 1 year, right? This has to be a 2 to 3 year build here, and you literally can't solve every problem in one offseason, and you can't always solve it with one player, right? So if the next player who's 90% of Milton Williams is available next year, the Panthers might have to go spend 22, 23 million for him, and that might be worth it because I still think they need impact players on the defensive line. I just like that they've, I think, moved in the right direction there and then went with McMillan where they did in the draft. All right. Las Vegas Raiders are on your list here. I like that. So people were asking about Seattle. I don't think Seattle's going to make the list because when you do the add and subtract, they might be better next year. I'm not saying they won't be better, but when you add and subtract, they lost Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, added a whole bunch of other pieces, which are intriguing and fun. But it was like they were fun and intriguing after they lost these huge pieces, right? It was a fun rebuild, I think, for Seattle. The Raiders, though, a lot of tangible, like, they're going to be better next year, just starting with, I think, Geno Smith under center and then everything else they did around him.
Well, having sent in the names to Will yesterday and seeing the graphics on the sheet in front of me, I can tell you that the Seahawks will not be making the list. Look, they did a good job of filling in the holes that they dug themselves, but this is like they dug the holes, right? They went into this offseason with a starting quarterback who's very good. Look at that little graphical thumbs up by mistake. With a starting quarterback who's very good, with a very good receiving core because they had JSN, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett was hitting the market, etc. But they were in a really good position with a major problem in the interior of the offensive line, which has been there for at least a year. They then created 2 more holes by trading away Geno Smith, by trading away DK Metcalf, and you're like, well, now we need to fill in those before we go anywhere. So they filled in the hole at quarterback by going to get Sam Darnold. Now, did that upgrade them from where they started from with Geno Smith? Not clearly. I mean, maybe. Darnold last year was probably better than any single season we've seen from Geno Smith, but not night and day, and he absolutely imploded at the end of it. So will he be better next year? Who knows? The receiver thing, right? Cooper Kupp comes in. Is he clearly an upgrade over DK Metcalf at this point in his career? Again, not really. So the net improvement there might not exist at all. And then we get to, they then did upgrade the interior of the offensive line, Gray Zabel, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the Raiders, they started off with no quarterback and they bring in Geno Smith. So immediately it's a huge upgrade in the right direction. So yeah, I mean, Seattle to me doesn't belong on this list, but the Raiders absolutely do.
So they get Geno Smith in the building, draft Ashton Genty in the first round. We broke down their draft last year. I called it the most interesting just because the mix of players, the Jack Bash, Dante Thornton combination, right? You've got the physical second-round receiver in Bash. You have the deep threat in Dante Thornton, plus the size that he brings to the table. So really love that. Love what they're re-signing Max Crosby, by the way, just making sure that he's there for the foreseeable future, I think is a part of this offseason as well. And then a couple other, moves, trying to get them. Alex Kappa wasn't great last year in Cincinnati, but bringing him in on the offensive line where he's had success in the past, trying to get the best out of him, get him back on track, bringing in Jeremy Chin in the secondary. I think there's still more work to do in the secondary for the Raiders. Again, we're not talking about a 1-year rebuild here, but as far as some of the offseason additions, starting with Geno Smith, they're going to be more competitive. The story here, though, when we were fixing every team in 5 minutes before they made this trade, when we were doing those moves, I said, punt on this year. I know Pete Carroll's getting old, but let's do a culture play. Let's get Spytek, 12 picks, and let's just think to 2026. They're not doing that. And I know Raiders fans, they're like earmuffs here for a minute. There's some similarities to when Dave Ziegler took over 2022 season. I said the same exact thing. Raiders punt. The Chiefs are the top dogs in this division. Try to compete in a couple of years. And they said, nope, we're trading for Devontae Adams. We're going all in with Devontae Adams and Derek Carr. And clearly that didn't work. So there's elements of that, right? Which is let's compete right now. But I don't think the Devontae Adams trade, though, kind of mortgaged a bit of the future for the now. I don't think the Raiders are mortgaging the future for now, but they're trying to do both simultaneously, right? Rather than a full, like, let's just punt. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying I think they're more competitive this year. The most important thing, though, for the Raiders is let's be competitive in 26 and 27 and make sure that the pieces are in place to compete then.
And let's not overlook, by the way, the first signings, right? The Pete Carroll, John Spytek dynamic coming in to be the new regime. I mean, this was another team that kind of, voluntarily 1 year GM and got rid of him, made a change right away, even though unusual to get like a 1 year, one and done GM, but they were like, no, like firm, hard stop. Let's completely move in a different direction. Pete Carroll, really interesting hiring because of his age, in Seattle, I think it was a reasonable call to move in a different direction, just because I think he'd reached that point where it's at least a justifiable argument to say he's still a really good coach, but like the message has grown stale. Just change for change's sake can have a positive impact. Now, that's dangerous because change for change's sake can always get a lot worse as well. But I think it's at least an argument that's reasonable. But I think he's still a really good coach. He's shown multiple times that he's able to like reset the culture of a building, to build a program, whether it's college or the NFL, and move things in a really positive direction quite quickly. So Pete Carroll coming in, I think, will make a significant difference. And then Geno Smith, look, we can debate what he is, but he's not a bad quarterback. He's a good quarterback who tends to play quite badly in the red zone, which, like, completely candidly is a very big problem. Like, that's, in terms of weaknesses to have, that's a really unideal one. But that doesn't mean he has no business, being a starting quarterback, or he doesn't do an awful lot of positive on top of that, right? Geno Smith, particularly, again, remember how bad that interior of the offensive line was for Seattle. Geno Smith is a phenomenal upgrade over anything the Raiders have had for the last several years. Is he ever going to be in that top 8 category that we keep talking about is the target? No, probably not, right? And that is a weakness. Like he will get you quite far in terms of upgrade, but he's not the answer necessarily long term. But he is a phenomenal upgrade. He makes them immediately competitive, and that is why I think you're seeing the approach that you talked about. They don't need to strip it all back to the bare metal and rebuild from the ground up. They can do this competitive rebuild because Geno Smith makes them competitive, and they can now start adding pieces around him, and they can win games next year.
Tom Telesco, he meant like one and done, weird GM hire. He had just been fired by the Chargers. GMs are rarely hired for a second time. Just the way Thomas Dimitroff was talking about that recently on our friend Ross Tucker's podcast. It's just not a common thing, right? You see retread coaches all the time. Telesco comes in for 1 year. He did leave a couple nice parting gifts, though, in Brock Bowers and Jackson Powers-Johnson. His first 2 picks, Bowers at pick 13, JPJ, a guy that we were saying, hey, if Seattle at pick 16 last year would have taken him, we wouldn't have thought that was crazy. I think he backed that up in year 1 that he's going to be a good player. So, yeah, there are some pieces here for the Raiders who I think are moving in the right direction. And a big part of their offseason is, yes, Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly, John Spytek, right? We're counting that, I think, in this, resetting the organization and in the way they've done things as part of them having one of the better off seasons here.
They managed to bring back Malcolm Kuntz as well, who's a guy I thought would more than likely escape them in free agency and get signed somewhere. That was a really nice, sneaky, not addition, but like a retention.
Yeah, no, that's a good shout. I mean, again, my concerns, I was wondering if they would be in the Jalen Ramsey sweepstakes, like if they're really going for it. That's not part of the long-term plan, but if they're really trying to be competitive this year, I think they have one of the worst on-paper cornerback situations. I wonder if there is more to do post-free agency here for the Raiders, but I like the direction that they've gone in. And it wasn't exactly what I had predicted, but I like the direction and think they're certainly better for this season.
That's a good shout as well. Like, as much as the majority of the offseason is finished now, we've had coaching carousel, GM carousel, the free agency period, the draft. There is this period, this like second free agency period, right? Where everyone's roster then settles. We see what they've done in the draft. We see the undrafted free agents they signed. And then you get to say, well, what's the last thing we need to fill before we get into the season? And we have all these sort of remaining free agents that are still out there waiting for the phone call, or maybe the trade deal that can happen based off everything settled. There are still moves to be made, and moves that will be made that, will impact NFL teams heading into the season. I mean, this is the time-ish when James Bradbury ended up going to the Eagles and being a really big part of that team a couple of years ago. Those types of moves are still theoretically out there.
I'm going to call this the James Bradbury period. That's my most famous, most impactful one. A massive need that year for the Eagles at corner. They got him for pennies on the dollar and with no future compensatory pick ramifications. That's the other benefit of the signing the veterans right now. So, or guys who have been released like Bradbury was. All right, let's go. Washington Commanders next on the list here. Again, another team, rookie contract quarterback, money to spend. And it's interesting to me when you say, hey, new GM, Adam Peters, not only do you have to choose the quarterback, Jaden Daniels, and you could say, hey, that was by that time the consensus number 2. There may have been some debate between Jaden Daniels and Drake May. Did he make the right move? Obviously, Jaden Daniels is the right move there. And that's not even a knock on May. I just think we know what Jaden Daniels is. But after that, like, how are you going to build this team? Are you going to be uber aggressive and spend money with Jaden? Yes. And not just spend money, but spend draft capital too. And I like the mix of Washington drafting in volume last year, only 5 picks this year, but I think they did well with those picks. But going to get Laramie Tunsil was very creative, Sam. When we were sitting here and fixing every team in 5 minutes mode, and you're looking around the league and it's like, man, I feel bad for the teams that need a tackle. If you really need a tackle or 2, and you could put Washington in that category, could have used upgrades on both sides. You needed a tackle or 2. Yeah. You had to get creative to go get a Tunsil. I hear Texans fans, do you know what you're getting in Tunsil? Yeah, I got a really good pass protector. Maybe had some penalty issues at the wrong time last year. I get it. But you don't find a lot of Tunsils out there. Peters got creative to get him, was aggressive to get Marshawn Lattimore. That might be the riskiest one, I think, to go get Debo for a 5. I thought they did a really nice job adding some impact pieces, but also not completely sacrificing the youth in Washington.
Yeah, this was a really interesting offseason because one of those things when you find your quarterback, right? The rookie quarterback contract, that's the jackpot. That's what everyone's searching for. Really, everyone is targeting a Jaden Daniels, right? What looks like an elite young quarterback on a rookie contract. Like, that's the absolute jackpot. And once you get that, for the next couple of years, you're going to have this huge advantage relative to everybody else in the NFL in terms of that contract and what it allows you to do and where it allows you to spend. So how do you deploy that advantage? And, a lot of teams will then target, like, who are the players we want to retain or who's the big free agent we can bring in. Washington instead went, well, who's available on the trade market that is already sitting there on a sort of relatively bloated contract that may be available, and we're going to flip low picks to bring in potentially elite players who are on big money, right? So they bring in Laramie Tunsil and Debo, let's say, is the 2 most obvious and biggest additions there. I mean, Tunsil is a top 3 pass blocking left tackle in today's NFL. Now, is he a perfect player? Absolutely not. He does have more penalties than you would want. He's not the best run blocker in the world, though that's probably overstated by some people. And certainly from hearing Houston media and Houston fans talk about him, he may be a suboptimal locker room presence. Let's put it that way, right? And that is interesting, especially because we talked about this with the Lions pre-draft, right? For a team that places a lot of value on culture, can you make exceptions every now and again? And we were like, would the Lions ever draft a James Pierce Jr. based off the fact that they covet culture and he might not be a culture fit? Washington, remember, the first thing Dan Quinn did was everybody he brought in was a culture fit, right? I don't even care if they're good players or not. We need somebody to come in and be a leader and reset the culture of this building. Like, the next season, they then go and make it a culture fit exception, potentially, in Laramie Tunsil because he's that much of an upgrade at left tackle, at still the most important position on the offensive line. That allows you to flip Brandon Coleman to the other side. He can now compete with Andrew Wiley. 2 guys can compete and maybe be the answer at one spot. So now you've got an elite caliber left tackle, a solid center, a very good, if not elite, right guard in Sam Cosmi, and then 2 spots that are a little bit up in the air, Nick Allegretti at left guard, Brandon Coleman, Andrew Wiley at right tackle. But we've got something to work with there. That's a big upgrade on the offensive line. Debo Samuel has been a unique playmaker in the NFL. We don't know quite what kind of deployment he will have in Washington. Will he lose a lot of the running back stuff? Will he be more of just a wide receiver? Either way, I think he's a major upgrade over what they had, even if he's not, even if he doesn't get back to peak Deebo Samuel. I think if you limit him to just the current version of just the slot receiver version of Deebo Samuel, it's an upgrade over what they had. And now you start to look at a receiving core that's got McLaurin. They brought in Michael Gallup as a buy low, see if he can get back to where he used to be. Noah Brown is a useful receiver. Deebo now there. Like, this is an interesting receiving core they've got now. And they made some moves in the draft.
In addition to, just from a free agency perspective, brought back Bobby Wagner for a year, brought in Jonathan Jones for a year to potentially start at outside corner. And the draft moves complement a lot of those moves there. Josh Connerly with their first round pick at tackle. Okay, he competes at right tackle right away with Brandon Coleman. Maybe Coleman goes to left guard. All of a sudden you have some depth here where there's like 7 potential starters there, including Andrew Wiley, rather than just 4 starting caliber players for 5 spots, say. So there's more musical chairs potentially on the offensive line. Trey Amos at corner, with Jonathan Jones in there on 1 year. Amos battles him for playing time on the outside, and just see what happens, right? So I love that, the depth play there. Did they overpay maybe for a guy like Javon Kinlaw? Maybe, but again, I would like to see that money. So kind of what you were saying, like there's not always another player available. The other thing I would highlight, there's not always something else to do with your $5 million. So say, you know what I mean? Like, that's just the truth. Like Kinlaw, like if you only got Kinlaw for $10 million, I'd be like, hey, that's a pretty nice move there. Yeah, he's a good pass rusher. But you tack on $5 million and now it's $15 million per year over the next 3. The next $5 million isn't always, okay, well, now you missed out on this starting linebacker. Now you missed out on this, it's not all it. I'm not saying don't be smart with your finances. It's just not always 1-for-1 in a first contract quarterback world, right? I think you can get away with more overpays there, so to speak. So that's what I thought was interesting about Washington here. Is the other thing I'll say, we went into this free agency period saying, well, guys like Javon Kinlaw are going to get overpaid because it's a weak class. It's a terrible class. And so if you have a first contract quarterback and money to spend, you do it creatively by making some trades. And it's like, I would rather spend my money and give up draft picks too, but spend my money on the Tunsil's and the Deebos of the world, because what else was I going to do with that money in free agency where the class was not very strong?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not a perfect offseason. I mean, there are things that I don't love about this offseason. Paying Kinlaw that contract is one of them. Even I think I would have saved that money and tried to find a different option at that spot. But anyway, there's that, and there's the fact that if you want to criticize their draft, and a lot of people hated this draft, it's because they didn't necessarily target acute areas of need. And the biggest area of need for this team, basically since they dealt away their edge rushers, has been edge rusher. And they were in position. They could have drafted a Donovan Ezeraku, say, with their first round pick. Instead, they go with Josh Connerly. Like, if you want to criticize this draft, you would say they did not target the areas of weakness, right? We thought they needed an edge rusher, principally. We thought they needed safety. They could have drafted, safety in the first round as well. They didn't do that. And they didn't really hammer those later on either. Like, that's the area where you'd say, okay, I think this was a really good offseason. They've basically brought in a lot of players that should upgrade. They do still have sort of fairly acute areas of need, even now, May the 5th, as we're in this world. And they may be a perfect example of, like, if there is a guy who gets cut or if there's somebody still available, like, they might still be working to fill those spots.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest about the Commanders last year. We do a lot of our analysis based off looking at the depth chart, looking what's on the team. I don't think you're looking at that team even last year and looking up and down that depth chart saying, oh, yeah, of course, this was a Final Four team. Like, when you look at the Eagles and the Chiefs, and you look at the Lions, who I know the Commanders beat, but you looked at other rosters, it's like, all right, these are Final Four type of teams. The Bills, the Ravens, those are teams you see in the AFC, NFC Championship. The Commanders overachieved last year, maybe in part because Jaden Daniels is a future MVP and a superstar, and that's fine. But, yeah, I think there's still more work to do, and that they're just moving in the right direction with this offseason. And I certainly wouldn't put them as far as like non-QB roster strength in the top 5 or anything like that, but they're moving in the right direction, even if there is more work to do. Let's go Los Angeles Rams. And I think, the big thing here is Davante Adams. Just bringing him in.
Yeah, so there's another interesting one because I think theirs is about retaining their players, right? Now, Davante Adams, we'll get to him as an addition, but their big thing was, remember, at the start of this offseason, it was like, will they, won't they on Matthew Stafford? Like, he was a trade target for teams heading into this offseason. We were like, the Rams may deal away Matthew Stafford and go in a completely different direction. Now, that always seemed kind of crazy to me, and I don't think it was ever really on the table. I think the way it played out, they were basically using the market to tell them what to pay Matthew Stafford. Like, they had, in my opinion, my reading of that situation is they had gone to his representatives. Hey, we're interested in extending Matthew. The representatives were like, all right, here's the cost. And they're like, that's insane. Not a chance. And there was an impasse, right? And they then used the market to effectively bridge that gap and come to what the number should be. And in order to do that, it's like, well, we may trade him away, yada, yada. So they end up settling for an extension for Matthew Stafford. So they continue. The Rams were close last year. So you continue being in that window of, we could make some noise, we could win a championship. But that's the big thing, is they resolve the Matthew Stafford thing. And then once you get that solved, well, now you can go and add Davante Adams to this, effectively swap Cooper Kupp for Davante Adams in terms of how the offseason played out. Given where they each are at this point in their careers, I think that's an upgrade. Davante Adams can still 100% play. Cooper Kupp, less sure about what kind of impact he can make at this point in his career, given what he looks like right now. So I think that's an upgrade. And then, same thing with retention. Alaric Jackson was a guy that was being coveted as a potential left tackle option for teams. He got re-signed. They brought him back. So I think the Rams did a really good job of retaining pieces that could have left the building and then added Davante Adams on top of that.
And more important than Stafford and Davante Adams is they bring in Willie Lampkin in undrafted free agency.
Yes, naturally.
So we know that. No, I think the Rams, we had mentioned a couple of years ago, I thought the Lions were the first team in a while. You probably put the Lions, recent 49ers, teams that rebuilt brick by brick without a quarterback overhaul. So like what we just described with Washington. How did Washington rebuild? Well, they hit on Jaden Daniels. And so no offense to Jared Goff, but the Lions built that thing brick by brick. And then they brought in Goff, who had been all the way from Super Bowl quarterback to like a bottom 10 quarterback in given seasons. But they built this incredible team around Goff and, maximized him and got the most out of him. The Rams, they have Stafford, and you can rank him wherever you want. But from a case study standpoint, Sam, what a run by the Rams to go get Stafford, win the Super Bowl after years of going for it, stripping it down to the point where, 2 off seasons ago, we were like, who is playing for the Rams? I mean, this is Stafford, Aaron Donald, and no offense to the Senior Bowl, but like a college all-star game roster surrounding those two. How are the Rams going to compete here heading into the 2023 season? That was before we knew Kyren Williams was as good as he was, and Puka Nacua was a future star. And so now they've rebuilt this thing up, and now you have Jared Verse, and now you have Kobe Turner and Braden Fisk and all these talented players that they've added the last couple of years. This might be the next iteration of building a roster almost from scratch, with the only other piece being, hey, Stafford's been consistent here. And look, there's still some fun questions to figure out beyond this year, what happens with Stafford. But the Rams have done a great job, I think, rebuilding this roster. So for me, them being on this list isn't so much, it's kind of like a multi-year, hey, they've had this youth movement, hit on a lot of pieces, now sprinkling in Davante Adams. Love the Poona Ford addition. If we mentioned Bobby Brown III going to Carolina, I think Poona Ford has been that sneaky, really good run defender that a lot of teams over the last few years, the Bills, the Chargers, they've gotten the benefit of having on the team. Now the Rams get that guy. I just love this, what the Rams have done. So it's not these massive moves this offseason, but just the right additions to this foundation that they've built over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I agree. It's not splashy, it's not spectacular, but I think this is a really good offseason for them, given where they were heading into it. I think it would have been very easy. I mean, if, again, I don't think there was necessarily fire where that smoke was, but let's say they had traded away Stafford. I mean, they would have blown this thing up and they would be done heading it. Like, this would not be a competitive team heading into 2025, the season. Instead, they are positioned to be a contender. I mean, this Rams team should be looking at the playoffs and thinking we can go on a run and we can get one last ring for Stafford and everybody else before he calls it a career. So I think it has to be seen as a successful offseason because of that.
All right, next team added to the list here, Minnesota Vikings. Completely overhauled that offensive line. I mean, they're another team now. They had a decision on Sam Darnold. They had a legitimate decision that was, I don't know if it was made easier by the collapse over the last couple weeks,
but it was harder.
It was probably made even more difficult.
In fact, I think it changed the decision, but I think it made the decision harder.
I mean, if we went back in time, if Sam Darnold was average in those last two games, they lost, a hard-fought game against the Lions and against the Rams in the playoffs. If that was the case, I think the Vikings bring Sam Darnold back, but to the detriment of the moves that they did make, which was the offensive line. So here's what Minnesota did actually do. They didn't pay Sam Darnold, so now they play in this first contract quarterback world, which frees up the money to go get Will Fries at right guard, who's got 5 or 6 good game stretches in his career. Like, he hasn't been a great guard, but he's making over $17 million a year. Ryan Kelly at center, first-round pick Donovan Jackson. So that's like the balance. I always talk about the balance sheet. Coming into the offseason, I don't know if Minnesota lays this out perfectly, but you could have had one Sam Darnold and maybe a Ryan Kelly on the offensive line. You get one offensive line upgrade, or you could have J.J. McCarthy and 3 potential offensive line upgrades with Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, and Donovan Jackson. So that was what they went in with. And look, J.J. McCarthy plus an overhauled interior offensive line. That was the big offseason here for the Vikings. Plus the defensive moves, bringing in Javon Hargrave, bringing in Jonathan Allen. They have been incredibly aggressive bringing in veteran talent the last few seasons.
Yeah, and there's also, so first and foremost, it's like the Darnold question heading into the offseason. I think those final 2 games made that a very difficult question for Minnesota. I agree. I think if he had played average or well in those final 2 games, I think they'd have re-signed him and brought him back, and they would have gone in a completely different direction, and that would have changed everything. It would have reduced the spending money they have, all these kinds of things. And I think given how dramatic the collapse was and given the money that the Seattle Seahawks ended up paying him, I think the Vikings were correct to stick with the original game plan, which is J.J. McCarthy is the starter for this team. Darnold was only ever there as a placeholder. And though he may have changed our minds through 15 games last season, what we saw at the end was so concerning. We're better off just sticking with the original plan and moving on. So I think the first thing first, I think they made the correct decision to move on from Sam Darnold and go in a different direction. Now it's not to say there's no risk attached to that, right? We don't know what JJ McCarthy's going to be yet. And maybe it's like, the way if you flip a coin 10 times and they come up heads 10 times, it doesn't change the odds that the 11th will be heads or tails, right? It does, however, feel a lot less likely that the next one will also be heads. I kind of feel that way with the quarterbacks from last year, even though all of the other ones look good. That doesn't change the odds that JJ McCarthy will be good from that class, but it sort of feels like it does, right? Like the chances of it almost feels like because all of the other ones are good, the next one has to not be good.
Or it's like, oh, he was just part of this great class. He's just
maybe
he's there with those guys. The other part of the equation here is they're probably going to get a 3rd-round compensatory pick next year for Sam Darnold. So that's all a part of the equation. And I'm a big – I don't know how much teams actually look at this, but I love the thought exercise of the holistic, here's what we got from this guy. Here's what we paid for this guy. Here's what we got out of him. And what an investment in Sam Darnold. 1 year, $10 million got you a 14-win season and then a 3rd-round pick back in compensatory the following year. That if you make so my theory on that is if you continue to make moves like that over time, like you're winning, right? You're building a better roster. The tricky part is in the middle where you say, well, actually, did we stumble into our next franchise quarterback at Sam Darnold? And that's what complicated things for at least a little bit.
I mean, if you took the play out of it, if you just an NFL team would pay $10 million for a 3rd-round pick in a heartbeat, right? So if you just look at it that way, they effectively paid $10 million of cap space last season for a 3rd-round draft pick next season. Every NFL team would do that instantly. Like if you gave them the option to buy draft picks like that for $10 million. They would make that move in a heartbeat. Added to the fact that they then had this incredibly successful season and, looked like they were going to be a Super Bowl contender until the collapse at the end. It was an incredible move for them. But I also think that's why they deserve credit for saying, good as that was, the correct thing to do is to move on and take the 3rd round pick and not spend the money and give the keys to the quarterback we thought was going to be in charge last season anyway, instead of, being distracted by the success of last season and sort of almost, not being fooled because maybe Darnold could repeat that, but potentially changing everything based off those games.
Well, the other data point that you got there that I mentioned throughout the season a lot is a Kevin O'Connell data point. Now we have career 500 quarterback Kirk Cousins becomes like a 650 quarterback with the Vikings. We have career underachieving former first rounder Sam Darnold all of a sudden becomes a 14-win quarterback under Kevin O'Connell. He's stacking W's over there, Sam, as far as QB development goes. Now, look, that's a sample size of 2. We don't live in that world of he's going to do it again. But if he does it with J.J. McCarthy, the only other coaches who have that kind of track record and history in the NFL, I would say, are Kyle Shanahan and Andy Reid, who as offensive-minded coaches have gotten really good play out of either different style quarterbacks or quarterbacks who didn't do things elsewhere, right? That's the way I would put it. Shanahan has a history there. Andy Reid has a history there. We're one quarterback away now from putting Kevin O'Connell there, and I think that's really valuable. It becomes a valuable lesson here for the Vikings, and maybe part of the decision as well. Hey, he might be our big advantage. O'Connell, the system, also the pass catchers were fantastic. But yeah, look, Minnesota went into the offseason saying we've got, I think there's 2 things here. Issues on the interior of the offensive line. They brought in the 2 Colts, Ryan Kelly and Will Fries. They drafted Donovan Jackson, completely overhauled from left guard to right guard. That feels like a move in the right direction. The other piece was now for the second straight offseason, they brought in pass rushers. Last year, they went hard on the edge, Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, and they drafted Dallas Turner. This year, it's Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen on the interior. So now you've talked a lot about Brian Flores' defense. There's a point in the season where maybe teams catch on and it's not great. They finally, I think, have the flexibility to just rush 4. You don't have to be crazy aggressive and wild from a defensive scheme standpoint. You can just rush 4 and change things up on 3rd down. And it does feel like that's been a move the Vikings have been at least itching toward these last couple off seasons.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how those defensive tackles pan out because at their best, those guys have each had a season that ranks amongst the best pass rushers from the inside in the NFL, right? They've each been, I think, a top 3 graded interior pass rusher at PFF at some point in their NFL career. Now, neither guy is coming off that season, and Jonathan Allen in particular, it's been a little while since he's been at that level. Javon Hargrave, is coming off injury, and he may be declining at this point. So there's a sort of sizable amount of risk attached to both those guys, but the payoff could be huge. If each one of those guys is able to recapture something like their best play within this creative, attacking Brian Flores defense, that could be a monster upgrade for what has been a pretty weak part of this team for a few years now.
Yeah, and look, when you have, keep repeating this, but when you have first contract QB, when you have financial flexibility, I think you can make signings like that feel a little riskier. Oh, Jonathan Allen with his injuries and Hargrave hasn't played his best football in a year or 2. I think you can make those moves because again, where else are you going to spend the money? You're trying to hit home runs. I think with the financial flexibility, and that's where Minnesota is. I thought they tried to hit home runs in some good places. They wanted to be better on the spine of both lines of scrimmage, and I think they upgraded in both areas. Next team on the top 10 off seasons, interesting one here, Sam. Kansas City Chiefs, where they came into this offseason with probably the most uncertainty since their last Super Bowl loss. And I'll let you put this list together with me to react to it. And I agree with most. We agree on a lot of things. What was your thought process, though, putting the Chiefs? Because they had this uncertainty, but they navigated it pretty well this offseason.
Yeah. So, look, first and foremost, it's built heavily off the draft that they had. I thought Kansas City had arguably the best draft in the NFL. So that's going to be a big part of it. But I think the decisions that they've made in terms of free agency, retaining players, letting players go, I think they were it was a solid collection of decisions, a solid net of decisions when you take the whole lot together, right? So they trade away Joe Thuney. Now, on the one hand, you're like, well, that's their best offensive lineman, maybe, right? Or at least one of the top two. You trade him away for not a huge amount. That's crazy. But the reason they did it is because of the investment they already had in the offensive line, because of the money they're going to have to allocate to the offensive line, and because of the weaknesses they already had. So I understand cashing in there. That allowed them to retain Trey Smith on the other side, who's younger, who's got a longer term future with the team. They brought back Charles Omenihu. They bring in Jalen Moore. They paid to do it, but I understand the roll of the dice there. Jalen Moore looked pretty good in relief of Trent Williams for San Francisco. You know, Jalen Moore for $15 million a year versus Dan Moore Jr. for $20 million a year. I mean, I understand that gamble, right? He is certainly less proven than Dan Moore, but I think he also has higher upside than Dan Moore. So for $15 million a year, $5 million a year cheaper, I get that as a gamble. I think that makes some sense. So I think overall, given the uncertainty that they had heading into this offseason, I think they did a pretty solid job of retaining the players that they wanted to retain, moving on from a guy that they were sort of boxed into a corner of needing to move on from anyway, and getting a draft pick in return for it. And then they went into the draft and I think had a phenomenal draft top to bottom.
Yeah, I mean, prior to free agency, we were like, wow, they just traded Thuney, and we don't know what they're going to do with Trey Smith, end up franchising him. And I think, there's still a long-term deal to be worked out with Trey Smith to give them a little bit more financial flexibility. I liked what they did at corner, just bringing in a Christian Fulton, because they had potential questions at corner. And now they look like they have depth there. And they went into the draft mostly with pretty good depth, Sam, and then the ability to look the Josh Simmons draft pick and getting him at 32 overall might be the long-term solution. I think that just pairs well with the Jalen Moore signing. It pairs well to maybe solve this problem that is a serious problem, right? Like the Chiefs offense, I hate using the word fragile, but they've clearly had it. When they have issues at left tackle, the offense has issues. And the Chiefs are held to a much higher standard. They're held to a standard of, you've been in the AFC Championship every year since Mahomes has been the starting quarterback. The goal is championships. And if you don't win a championship for some reason, how do you fix those problems? And those problems are often at left tackle. They're often on the offensive line. And so the Chiefs have potentially solved that with a transition of Jalen Moore and the future of Josh Simmons. So I just like the way they navigated that problem, because like we said a little while ago with Washington, if you went into this offseason saying, man, I have a real left tackle, I have a tackle problem, it was a difficult offseason to navigate that, because Dan Moore's making $21 million a year, and there were not a lot of other options there. The great Morgan Moses at right tackle, I mean, he's getting older, right? There's only so many tackle options. Commanders got creative by trading for Tunsil and saying, we're willing to pay that money. I thought the Chiefs got creative by very early in free agency saying, we'll do Jalen Moore 2 years, $15 million, creep back toward average at that position, and then getting Josh Simmons, which could be the future upside. Hey, he's going to be there for the next 8 years type of play. So I thought that navigating that was creative, I thought, for the Chiefs, and worked out pretty well.
Yeah, and they'll, now I think the plan will be to kick Kingsley Suamataia, last year's draft pick, into guard. Hopefully he can be an upgrade over what Mike Caliendo was last season. Worst case scenario, you have what Mike Caliendo was last season this season, and you know what you're dealing with there. So, I get it for that offensive line, but they were able to bring back multiple pieces on defense. Omenihu, Nick Bolton re-signed as well. Marquise Brown they brought back on offense, which I thought was sort of sneaky, a good move as well. We didn't really get to see what Marquise Brown was supposed to do to this offense last season, because he got hurt almost immediately, and then only came back like right at the end, in the middle of the season, where it's not like you can kind of really get him up to speed to see what it's going to look like. So I think that offense is kind of a work in progress to see what the deployment of those receivers is going to look like. Xavier Worthy, Marquise Brown, Rashee Rice. Now you've got Jalen Royals potentially can make an impact as a draft pick, even though he was a day 3 guy. Juju Smith-Schuster is still there. Like, this is an unusual collection of receivers that I don't think we really got to see what it would look like if they have a full, off-season program and training camp, et cetera, to figure out how it all goes together.
I mean, the Marquise Brown injury and then the Rashee Rice injury in week 4, I think that changed the trajectory for what Kansas City wanted to do. Their goal coming off, remember the previous season, Mahomes had one of the worst passer rating on 20-plus yard throws. Now, they won the Super Bowl. It didn't really matter, but we came into the season saying they're going to throw deep. They're going to throw deep. They made it a point to get faster, to throw deep. Xavier Worthy and Marquise Brown. And all of a sudden, once Rashee Rice went down too, it's like, well, Xavier Worthy has to be used underneath. And, maybe he's more horizontal speed for this offense right now. I think we're going to see them try for the vertical speed. So on paper, it looks dangerous with Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice working the underneath stuff and whatever Travis Kelce has left. If they all stay healthy, it's dangerous, right? So it's not. Yeah. It's part of the offseason. Like the Marquise Brown thing, I thought there'd be a little bit more of a market for him, but I think that's a big win for the Chiefs to just get him back for 1 year and try that speed experiment one more time.
Yeah, and again, it's not the perfect offseason by any means. They didn't necessarily fix a couple of issues with this team, but I do love that draft, right? Top to bottom, I think this could have been the best draft in the NFL. Josh Simmons, as we already talked about, potential long-term answer at left tackle. If he's not the answer at left tackle, he could be the answer at right tackle and let them get cheaper and move on from Juwan Taylor, who hasn't necessarily justified that contract. Omar Norman-Lott in the second round may have been a bit of a reach, but potentially immediately replaces what they lost in Tershawn Wharton in free agency. Ashton Gelati, the power edge rusher from Louisville in the third round, I think can make an immediate impact as well. Noel Williams, also in the third round, the corner from Cal, immediate return ability. That's the replacement for Mecole Hardman right out of the gate, right? The return skills, but also, to a long-term answer at corner. And then Jalen Royals in the fourth round, I think is a steal. Jeffrey Bassa, a linebacker, and then Brashad Smith. He's a 7th round pick. There was a few of these this year. I was busy writing favorite undrafted free agents, right? And I 3 or 4 of them were running backs, and they all got picked in the 7th round. So, and I think all those guys can actually end up making noise on the teams they went to. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, we didn't talk about for Washington, but he could be a real factor in that backfield. Brashad Smith could be a real factor for this Kansas City offense, even though he's a 7th round draft pick, former wide receiver convert, obviously has receiving Scantbacky type skills because of that, but I think also has some real ability to run between the tackles once he gets a little bit more comfortable with that process. That could be a steal in the 7th round as well. So genuinely top to bottom, this is a phenomenal draft, I think.
Yeah, really like the Chiefs draft. And I think they needed it. It was a big year for them this offseason. All right, the 10th team that we have written down to mention, we'll talk some honorable mentions and get some who we missed from the chat. Tampa Bay Bucks, Sam. And this one feels a little different too. A team that is so well reported how homegrown they are, and so many of their own draft picks, at least in the starting lineup and everything. But they didn't have to do a ton this offseason. But the Bucks, and then adding Emeka Egbuka, so they brought back Chris Godwin and drafted Emeka Egbuka. You get the 1 year of Hassan Reddick and see if you can get him rejuvenated in 1 year off the edge. What were your thoughts this offseason for the Bucs?
Yeah, it's been a couple of years now where Tampa Bay's offseason seems to have been about retaining their players. I don't know if that's a strategy long-term or if it's just a couple of years where this has been the case, but they seem to go into off seasons where the main course of action is let's try and get everybody back again. And I think they did a good job bringing back Chris Godwin, particularly when it sounds like the Patriots were willing to offer him more money to go somewhere else. Like getting him back for less money than somebody else was willing to pay him was a bit of a coup, even though he's coming off an injury again. That was a good move. Now, in isolate or put together, you can say, well, then did you need to go and get Emeka Egbuka in the first round, right? We can debate whether that as a totality makes sense. But at the time, I think bringing back Chris Godwin, given the offers on the table, was a really good piece of business. Hassan Reddick is a great 1 year roll of the dice option, I think, for pretty much any team. Didn't work out last season for him, but he's still talented. He's still he still generates pressure, and he still brings something to the table that this team didn't really have, right? Like particularly with Joe Tryon-Shoyinka hitting free agency and leaving. I mean, he wasn't necessarily bringing it himself consistently, but Yaya Diaby isn't that type of player. The defensive interior guys obviously aren't that type of player. Hassan Reddick brings something different to this pass rushing group that they didn't really have. So relatively quiet offseason. Bringing back Levante David is always a good move. So relatively quiet, free agency period, et cetera. But I think it was a good one to keep their players that they wanted, given where they were a year ago, and then add, a couple of fringe pieces like Hassan Reddick.
The Bucs are in a spot, Sam. I had a feeling, was it last offseason they paid Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans? I think it was last offseason. They had to make a decision and say, okay, are these guys the future here? Mike Evans going to be a Buck for life? Probably. Is Baker Mayfield the guy that isn't just coming off of one good season that we believe in going forward? And they believed in them. And it still felt like, hey, if they're going to compete in the NFC, that's a roster that's still a tick below what the Eagles are capable of putting out there, what the Niners had been putting out there, and say the Lions, with the way they had been building their team. I think, though, as the Niners, have a big overhaul, and the Lions showed a little weakness down the stretch with their injuries more than anything last year. Though, don't the Bucs feel like, hey, they can take a step? It's just from the continuity aspect of things. Just from a continuity aspect of things, while other teams, the Eagles have had some turnover. They've lost some players. They're relying on some youth. I don't want to use the word rebuild for them, but there's going to be an influx of youth in Philadelphia over the next 2 years with high volume of draft picks and the inability to just re-sign every free agent that we saw this offseason. The Bucs continuity, I think, has them a little bit closer to the top of the pack in the NFC right now. So that's what I think it feels like, that they have the luxury of an Emeka Egbuka pick in the first round and just continue in the Benjamin Morrison pick in the second round. I think they've had the luxury of picking just good football players over the last couple of years to add more depth to this roster.
I think they also have a relative luxury, like until another team really sort of solidifies their improvement. Like that division is still relatively weak compared with certain other divisions in the conference. So while they may be a notable tick below a team like the Eagles, you would say they have a much easier division to win than the Eagles do in any given season, until Atlanta or Carolina or whoever gets it together and shows that they're a different prospect going forward. Like the Bucs have this interesting dynamic where they might have an easier path to the postseason every time, only to then have to really step up the level of competition when they start meeting those best teams in the NFC.
So a couple teams that came to mind that we didn't have on the list here. I'm going to start with the Buffalo Bills, and then a couple teams in the chat that came up. The Bills, I really enjoyed their offseason. And this felt like a 2-year build up here, because last year at this time we were saying, hey, the Bills rebuild, right? I hate using the word again, but there's turnover. They're getting younger. And we didn't describe it as a rebuild, but we described it as this is the life cycle of football teams, right? We're not going to see Micah Hyde and who's the Mitch Morse, like Jordan Poyer. I mean, just a lot of veterans, Tre'Davious White. The veterans who were a big part of the Bills for the last few years are moving on. They think they have direct replacements for them, or we have a younger group replacing them. Let's see how it goes. Turns out the Bills were as good, if not better, last year than they were the previous year. So they had the youth movement going in the right direction. Guys like Christian Benford become the next guy at corner, and they come into the offseason with few needs because the youth, stepped up last year. And then they attacked the defensive line, as I mentioned. Like if they were playing football this weekend, they've got 12 guys rotating on the defensive line. I think there's too many. So I love the defensive line depth. I love the buy low on Joey Bosa for 1 year, $12 million, just to see, right? Can you get the most out of him, particularly down the stretch? So I really like what Buffalo did. And then if they had one need, it was starting corner. They get Maxwell Hairston in the first round, the way the board fell. So I liked Buffalo's offseason quite a bit.
What did you make of bringing in two guys that immediately got suspended for like 6 games or whatever it is? Michael Haidt and then Larry Ogunjobi were both parts of that free agency. Let's attack the defensive line along with Joey Bosa. And then like the next week or something, it was like, oh, by the way, both those guys are going to get 6-game suspensions.
I don't know. So I know in the drug testing world, a lot of that information is out there well before it becomes public. So I think they knew. I also think teams, I think a lot of teams are focusing on defensive line depth for 2 reasons. The Eagles did it, and so everybody has to do it. But it's always been an axiom in football. But the 17-game schedule, it is wild how just adding 1 game to the schedule makes it feel longer. And because it's not just that, it's 17 games plus if you don't get the number 1 seed, you don't get a bye. So you have to play the extra playoff game. Like the Bills would be in line for having, how many times they have the number 2 seed? They should have a bye more often in the old NFL. So it's just a longer season. And so I don't think the 6-game suspension matters a ton. It's the long play here. And they must have known. I think they would have been able to avoid contracts if it came up after. Like they knew what they were getting into. And they still said, what's the first 6 games? We're the Buffalo Bills. The goal is to beat the Ravens and the Chiefs in the playoffs, and to get to the Super Bowl. So I don't think they cared a whole lot.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's my working supposition that they were aware these were coming. I'm assuming that they were not blindsided by these 2 suspensions on guys they just signed. That would be insane.
My concern with that stuff as a former baseball player at the end of I came out at the end of the steroid era here is when a player is a free agent, and that was common, right? Here's this free agent, and oh, by the way, he's suspended because of the steroids that he did or whatever supplement that he took or whatever it might be in contract years. That would be the only concern. It's like in contract. Right. So what did the way you played last year, was that really you? Did you finally just get caught for this thing you were always doing? Did you just start doing it? Like those are bigger questions for me rather than like you're missing 6 games.
Are you telling me that if you were like 10 years older, we would have got to witness like steroid jacked Palazzolo, 6'10", 320 pounds of pure, like you would have been Mike Mamula as a pitcher?
I've been honest about this. I sat in the bullpen in college summer league in 2002. Like this thing really came to the forefront in 2003. I was sitting there in 2002 having this conversation with teammates. Like what are the steroids that are available? Which type? How would you do it? Like we had these conversations. So yeah, I don't know if I would have done it or not. But I can't say I went the complete opposite way. Instead of experimenting with that, I only took supplements 100% approved by MLB. I was afraid to get anything at GNC that was not on the approved list because you don't know what's in it, and all naturally got up to adding miles an hour and everything. So yeah, I did it the right way, but I definitely had some thoughts.
Just from a purely scientific curiosity point of view, I would have been fascinated to see what 5 years of pure juicing could have done to your physique. Like could we turn you into some sort of pure scientific like Ivan Drago and Rocky? Like what if we get you in the lab for 5 years with all the juice we can find? What can we create here?
I would have been throwing 98 to 102. I would not have had issues. I was, because my emotions were like up and down on the mound. I never felt like I had enough, like anger on the mound.
You'd be a pure ball of rage.
Yeah. It would have been great. I would have been a great closer. 98 to 102. JJ Putz coming in. Splitter at 92. Would have been beautiful. Would have been great.
The only downside of that is this show wouldn't exist because your heart would have already expired at the age of like 43.
Or I'd still be living off that like in the big leagues here. But like, Steve's still trying. Yeah. Steve's at 43 years old trying to keep it going here. Year 17 of his career. Wouldn't need you, Sam. Wouldn't need this show. You're right.
For multiple reasons, this show wouldn't exist. Yeah.
we wouldn't need Check the Mic. The chat was mentioned in the Texans as an offseason. I would agree with that one too. Because I love the 2 receivers that they added in the draft, and I liked their defensive line depth. I like the way they built their D-line this offseason. And another team, the bias here is that they didn't have to do much. I think to get on this list, of best offseasons, you either had so many holes like the Patriots or that you overhauled things, or a team like the Bears that had like, we come in off, or the Cardinals. We have an offensive line need. We have a defensive line need, and you attack it with 7 different answers. Or you're a team like Houston or Buffalo that is a playoff team, is a Final 8 team, and just has a couple things to sort out. And look, Houston, I think, had some big offensive line questions.
Yeah.
They rearranged a lot of deck chairs. But as we've said, I think it's better on paper, but also the coaching changes and everything could also make it better. So I think I'm banking on that. So I think the line will be okay. But I love what they did at receiver, and then shoring up some defensive line depth as well.
The line thing, I think, is what makes it questionable, because they kind of started off in a similar vein to Seattle, where it's like you had a line that was one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL last season, and you voluntarily removed the one good player that it had. Now, it's complicated because we mentioned before, Tunsil is fantastic as a pass blocking left tackle, but like there's not a queue of people there to say great things about him as a locker room personality. So nobody in Houston was sad to see him go, put it that way, right? And that, I don't know how much that matters. I honestly don't. Like, even if you have like the worst locker room presence in the world, how much is that worth relative to what he's doing on the field, right? I think that's a completely unknowable question right now. But from an on the field point of view, left tackle is significantly downgraded over what it was last year. Whether it's Cam Robinson playing as the stopgap, whether it's Arante Ursary, the rookie from Minnesota, coming in and winning that job, either one of those guys is almost certainly going to be significantly worse than Laramie Tunsil was, even factoring in his, unfortunate time penalties and false starts and all that kind of stuff, right? And then you've got the fact that the rest of that line is pretty much the same group as it was a year ago. Now, I do think that can improve, even though it's the same group, both in terms of just player variance and coaching scheme and all those things changing. So I think the line can get better as a totality, but it's difficult to look at that and be like, well, that's a clear win for what was the biggest problem on this team last year.
All right, man. Any other teams that you wanted to highlight or that may have just missed the cut?
I think the Chargers had a pretty good offseason. Depending on how you view the Myles Garrett thing, I think you could put Cleveland into that bucket as a win. He wanted out and they've got him back, and then they had a good draft, even though the process was weird.
Yeah. Cleveland had an interesting process offseason. Again, I almost come from like how dire did it look when we were trying to fix these teams in March, and where did they end up? And that's where I think the Chiefs, and it's like, all right, they solved some of these problems well. So that's another way of looking at this. Did you have a lot of problems in March, and did you have some good potential solutions there? I think from the Browns' perspective, there's at least like a couple darts thrown at the quarterback problem. There's a first-round pick sitting there next year, and you have Myles Garrett in the building. So that's a pretty good, spot to be in if you're the Browns.
Yeah, I think so too. It might not have. It's difficult without knowing what the process exactly was behind the scenes. It's difficult to know how much credit to give them for that. But I think the outcome was very good. The Giants, I think you can make a case, had a very good offseason. If you like Jackson Dart as a prospect, they had a very, very good offseason. The way they approached the draft with taking the elite player at the top and then coming back in for Jackson Dart. Like, if you think Dart is a guy that can become a high-level quarterback, that's a really, really good offseason.
And the Giants also feel like the team, Russell Wilson could still play well in stretches. They feel like the team that could be sitting there. I don't know what their schedule is going to be. We'll find out in the schedule release next week. But the Giants could be sitting there as like a 6-2 sneaky good team next year, where it's like, oh, they saved their jobs and this and that, but you're still wondering what Jackson Dart's going to be, but with the defensive line depth that they've added, and I thought they shored up the secondary, there's some potential there with the Giants for sure. All right, let us know who we forgot. Go ahead. You got more?
Last one. A lot of people really like Denver's offseason. I didn't like it as much as other people, hence them not showing up in this list, but a lot of people thought Denver had a really good offseason.
So I would say the reason for that for Denver is because what we talked about going into the draft, I don't see any massive needs here. If the biggest need is running back, there's a perception that your roster's in a good spot. And I would say, yeah, Denver, they've proved that their roster is in a good spot. Once again, last year at this time, we would have said we want more playmakers, but I think they showed it could work. We didn't know exactly what they'd get from Bo Nix, but obviously he had a really nice rookie season. On paper, the defensive line looked like a whole bunch of bodies, but no real stars. Well, that really worked well last year, and maybe Nick Bonito established himself as a future star. So, yeah, I think up and down the roster, things look good. Add Hufanga at safety. That was nice. I mean, we liked a couple of their free agent moves that just tidied things up. I thought bringing in Evan Ingram to shore up tight end so you didn't have to go in with a massive need there, which would have screwed them over if they were saying, hey, we'll get Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland in the first round. That would have been an issue. So I get it from the Broncos perspective, because they had a couple needs. They filled them in free agency, and then they theoretically could just, draft whoever they wanted. Yeah,
I mean, I guess it's more I think I'm lower on some of the free agent signings that they got than other people. I don't think Talanoa Hufanga is actually that great a safety, and I think a lot of people are really impressed by him and what he can do. DJ Jones at that kind of money, I think, isn't that phenomenal a signing. I like Dre Greenlaw. I think that's probably their best free agent signing, or the Evan Ingram one. So it's not like that a bad offseason. I just think that they're being a little bit overrated because of the Hufanga and DJ Jones signings.
That's what it was. I was raving about their free agent moves, including Greenlaw, who, by the way, picked up a serious quad injury within the last week or two here. So, or he's been injured, so he might be missing time heading into next year.
A serious quad injury in May.
He suffered a torn quad while working out, sources say.
I guess this is a guy who tore his Achilles or whatever it was, jumping on the field.
Running onto the football field. So, again, Steve's just looking at names, veteran names, strikes again, because they get hurt. They get hurt more often. Anyway, that's it for us. Let us know what your favorite offseason was. We're in offseason mode. Give us some ideas. Check the mic at the33rdteam.com. You can email us. Do you have a mug check? We have a check the mug link in the description with all of our new swag and everything. You're over at Parlor Donuts today. I am my house. I don't know if anyone can relate to this. I am at 15 to 20 mugs over expected if we had a stat for this. Like, the cabinet can probably hold 15 fewer mugs. So now we're stacking them and everything. And don't tell me, I may have bought one for my wife for Mother's Day with, like little cartoon images of the kids and everything. So I'm just adding more mugs. We got to cut mugs in my house here.
I was thinking about getting like a little espresso mug, the tiny little mugs at the handle that's impracticably small to use. Like, you can't actually use the handle properly. I was thinking about getting a little proper little espresso mug. I don't have one of those.
Oh yeah. My buddy has like only espresso with his machine. So that's like all his whole cabinet is all the espresso mugs. You should send me. I know you like watching me hold little espresso mugs and various things. So,
well, that way I could experience what it's like to be Steve for a minute. Like me in an espresso mug is the same as you in a regular mug.
That's what this is. My go-to mug, espresso mug. All right.
I sent you that picture the other day. That's one of my favorite Steve making things look small pictures that I have. Is you in the old PFF office with like half your head above the door frame. Let me show it to the people.
Door frames were about 4.5 feet tall. There it is. That's me just walking it. Like, I had to work in that office for many years. Ducking, not just a little duck. I'm calibrated to duck a certain amount through every normal doorway. Every normal doorway is about 6'7", 6'8". So I have a certain, I know the cadence of when to duck, how far to duck, and that doorway is like 5 feet tall. So can't do anything with it.
I have a whole collection of photos on my phone that are like, here's Steve making things look tiny. And that's one of them. Like, and to be fair, like, so that door frame.
That would be like a good section of the Discord.
Yeah. Like, I don't know how low that door frame is. It's definitely not the tallest door in the world. It is, however, nowhere near the top of my head. And you have to, like, it takes off half of your head to even get in there.
And we built a kitchen in there. It was rough. I did not make many trips to the kitchen for fear of concussion. I hit my head. Where was I going the other day with the kids? Took the kids out the other day, and the big issue is when the doorway, like the box, that holds the door, like when that hangs down too low on the door. Because I said I'm calibrated to like little duck. It's like the box that holds like the hinge of the door.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
When that hangs down low. So I had one incident when I was with the Giants going into the Giants calf, the minor league calf. It is like hard steel, and I hit it and went down, much like when we were in Arizona. That was like the 2 times in my life I almost like went to the ground hitting my head. But I had one the other day, like the box was hanging down so low, I ducked like I normally do, and boom, fell back. Might have been Home Depot. I forget. No, it wasn't. Where did we go? Wherever we went. Donut store.
What I've never understood.
I think it was
What I've never understood about that. I mean, I understand that the taller you are, the more in the way your head is of things that could hit it. But like, your eyes are positioned, 4 to 6 inches from the top of your head, right? Like right in the line of whatever it is that's about to smack you in the head. How do you not see it coming?
You're not peripherally looking up very often. Your peripheral vision,
you're looking forward.
Yeah, you're looking forward, but like peripherally, you're looking to the sides. Like you have awareness of the sides. Most people, like you, certainly have no need to have any awareness up, and I don't think most humans do. I'm 6'10" to answer the question here. So yeah, you're not like you can't see it. You just open the door and it's there. You're not looking up. No, you wouldn't know.
I feel like
I've been
like
your
my
height. I've been
vision,
my height. You wouldn't know.
I feel like
I've
my
been
vision
everybody's
would
height.
be much more aware of things that are like 6 inches from my
You're
eyes.
you're like the person who's like, man, if I had your height, I'd be in the NBA. Like, yeah, like you'd have your same 6'2" coordination and dribbling skills and shooting skills if you were this size. You think it's easy to dribble and shoot at this size? It's not.
I'm
What
just
makes Jokic so
so
special?
people that are 5'11" like me, it's not like we never encounter things that are lower than 5'11", right? Like I've come across situations where I've had to duck to avoid being hit in the head, and it's happened relatively naturally. I don't understand how you don't do that and you end up just smacking your face into things.
It's more opportunities. It does
Like
come down to
so
it's more opportunities.
you know the way most people, when you throw a ball at their head, they like naturally do that, right? Like they move their head instinctively out of the way of the projectile heading in towards it. I have, however, encountered individuals that don't. For whatever reason, they don't have that like inbuilt instinct, and they will try and catch the thing without moving their head. They will just like stick their hands up in front of their face, as opposed to like, this, right? Like my cousin, I was throwing a rugby ball with him, and like part of the game was to try and get the ball right in the guy's head, and you would catch it and move. But he would just like catch it hands right in front of the face. I'm like, eventually he's not going to catch it cleanly, and the ball is just going to clock him right in the face. That feels like what you do with things at your head height.
Brian, I mean, Brian is 6'7" in the chat, and he brings up a good point to help me make my case here. We're used to looking down, right? So my whole life is looking down on people. Everything I need awareness of is below me for the most part, right? So that's a big part of it. Plus, I got forked. I'm looking at the kids. Are they running? Are they running into the street? Like, are they running on the wet floor at the donut shop? Maybe they were. You're looking down.
All right.
Smug.
Feels
How would
like
you
that's
call
it
me
for this show.
smug? Well, not when somebody's calling me smug over here. Oh, because I'm looking down on you. It was a joke. It's a joke. Looking down on everybody. My nose up.
Terrible dad joke, Sano. You walked
well
right
done.
into that.
Do you know how to end this? Shout out to Will. Go. We'll give you two off days. Will. We'll see you on Thursday. Get producer Will get healthy by then. All right. So
ironic of the two of us, I've played contact football with pads, and yet you almost certainly have amassed more CTE in your time than I have just through walking into things.
Man, yeah. Yes. I've hit my head so many times. It's off-season mode. We're going to have some fun this off-season. Appreciate everybody for joining us. You can still hit the thumbs up. Oh, one last thing. If you're listening on Spotify, leave a comment. The Spotify people. We've talked to Austin Gale and everything. Just comments. They help. They help things grow on Spotify. Comments and likes and whatever. Reviews, do all the stuff on Spotify. We're growing on Spotify quite a bit, so that's fun.
Yes. Last thing before I actually hit the button and turn us off. Last comment there in the chat. Lauren asks, did anyone win t-shirts from our bets? We have at some point in this dead off-season process to go through all of the bets, regular season and then draft season, and cash out, send some merch to people. I think we lost one draft bet, but we definitely lost more than that in season. So yeah, we've got some merch to send out to people. Maybe
we'll do that for this Thursday. We'll talk about it. All right. We're back on Thursday. Off-season schedule. Monday, 9 a.m. Thursday at 10:30 a.m. That's it for us today. We'll see you again on Thursday with more. Check the mic.